The Castle by Franz Kafka. Chapter 20. I am your narrator. He probably have passed Erlanger's door with equal indifference if Erlanger hadn't been standing in the doorway, crooking his forefinger to beckon him in. Erlanger was already fully clothed, preparing to leave. He wore a black fur coat with a high-buttoned collar. A servant was just handing him his gloves and still held a fur cap. "You were supposed to be here long ago," Erlanger said. Kay was about to apologize, but by closing his eyes wearily, Erlanger showed that he could do without that. "It's about the following matter," he said. "There was once a girl called Frida serving in the bar. I know only her name. I don't know the girl herself. I'm not concerned with her. This Frida sometimes brought Clam his beer. There seems to be another girl there now. The change is of no significance, of course. Probably not for anyone, and certainly not for Clam. But the more important a man's work, and Clam is certainly the most important of all, the less strength he has to defend himself against the outside world. And as a consequence, any insignificant change in the most insignificant little things can be seriously disturbing to him. The smallest change on his desk, the removal of a dirty mark that has been there forever, anything like that can upset a man, and so can the arrival of a new barmaid. Well, of course, nothing of the kind bothers Clam. There can be no question of that, even if it would bother anyone else in any line of work you like to mention. All the same, we are in duty bound to watch over Clam's comfort by removing troublesome factors if they appear to us potentially upsetting, even if they do not, as is very probable, upset him at all. We remove these troublesome factors not for his sake, not for his work's sake, but for our own sake, for the sake of our conscience and peace of mind. So that girl Frida must return to the bar at once. Perhaps her return itself be disturbing. Then, and only then, will we send her away again. But for the time being, however, she must come back. I'm told that you are living with her, so kindly make sure she comes back immediately. Personal feelings must be left out of this. That's obvious. So I'm not going to enter into any further discussion of it. I am already doing more than is necessary, if I say that. Should you be of service in this small matter, it could possibly be useful to you in your further progress. And that is all I have to say to you. He nodded to Kay in farewell, put on the fur cap handed to him by his servant, and went down the corridor, walking fast but with a slight limp, and followed by the servant. Sometimes the orders given here were very easy to carry out, but Kay didn't like the ease of this one at all. That was not just because this order concerned Frida, and indeed, while it was intended as an order, it sounded to Kay like ridicule, but above all because it showed Kay how useless all his own efforts were. Orders were given above his head, the unfavorable and the favorable alike, and ultimately, even the favorable probably had a nub of something unfavorable in them. But anyway, they all went above his head, and his status was far too low for him to intervene or actually silence them and get his own voice heard. If Erlanger waves you away, what will you do? And if he were not to wave you away, what could you say to him? Kay was in fact clear in his own mind that his weariness had harmed him more today than anything unfavorable in the circumstances. But why could he, who had believed he could rely on his physical strength and would never have set out without that conviction, why could he not endure a few disturbed nights and one without any sleep at all? Why was he so uncomfortably tired here, in this particular place, where no one was ever tired, or perhaps, more likely, people were always tired without its affecting their work, but instead seeming to be good for it? You could conclude from that fact that, in its own way, it was a weariness entirely different from Kay's. Here, it was probably weariness in the midst of enjoyable work, something that from outside looked like weariness, but was really unshakable calm, unshakable peace. If you are a little tired at noon, that's part of the natural and happy course of the day. And for the gentleman here, Kay told himself, it is always noon. Very much in keeping with that idea, signs of life were now heard all over the place, on both sides of the corridor, at 5 in the morning. At first, the babble of voices in the rooms had something extremely cheerful about it. Sometimes it sounded like the happy shouting of children getting ready for an outing, or then again like chickens waking up in the hen house, a joyful noise just right for the dawning day. Somewhere or other, one of the gentlemen was even imitating the crowing of a cockerel. The corridor itself was still empty, but the doors were beginning to move. They kept being opened just a little way and quickly closed again. There was a positive percussion of such opening and closing of doors in the corridor, and now and then, looking through the gaps where the walls didn't reach the ceiling, Kay saw tousled mourning heads appear, only to disappear next minute. In the distance, a small trolley laden with files was being slowly pushed along by a servant. A second servant walked beside him with a list in his hand, obviously comparing the numbers on the doors with the numbers on the files. The trolley stopped outside most of the doors, and then usually the door was opened and the relevant files handed into the room, or sometimes just a note. In such cases, a little conversation would go on between the room and the corridor, probably a gentleman telling the servant off. If the door stayed closed, its files were carefully piled up just outside it. When that happened, it seemed to Kay as if the movement of the doors around him was no less, although the files had been distributed, but even increased. Perhaps the others were looking longingly at the files which were lying outside the door and, for some incomprehensible reason, hadn't been taken in yet. They couldn't understand how someone who had only to open his door to lay hands on his files didn't do so. Perhaps it was even possible that files which remained lying about would be distributed later to the other gentlemen who were already looking out at frequent intervals to see whether the files were still outside the door, meaning that there was still hope for themselves. Furthermore, the files left lying there were usually in particularly large bundles, and Kay assumed that they had been left where they were for now, either out of a certain malicious desire to show off, or for motives of well-justified pride intended to encourage the colleagues of gentlemen in the room. He was confirmed in this assumption by the fact that sometimes, always when he didn't happen to be looking, after the stacks of files had been on show long enough, it was suddenly and very quickly snapped up and taken into the room, and the door then remained closed as before. The doors all around calmed down at that point, either disappointed or pleased to see that such a provocative item had finally been removed. But then they slowly began moving again.